pull us off mute. Thanks for joining. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a little over a dozen folks online, so thanks for joining us. I guess I don't have any housekeeping items, so I'll just send it right over to Lynn for the director's cut.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks everyone for joining the webcast, as well as those of you who are in the room. Appreciate your showing up for our June update. We're talking April production. That's the delay in reporting and analysis that takes place. We'll start with oil production, up 1.1%. So that's happy news. 1,121,000, almost 122,000 barrels a day. That exceeds the revenue forecast by about 0.6%. So it's just basically right on with the new revenue forecast. Better, of course, than last biennium. Kind of jump to natural gas production. That's actually up 3.1%. So we're back into that paradigm where our natural gas production is going up at 3 times the rate that the oil production is going up. And so that bears watching and potentially presents future challenges when it comes to gas capture and hot spots developing around the high productivity areas. So I don't have a lot more detail on that, a little bit more when we get to gas capture, and a little comment about the kind of the gross areas where gas capture is great and where we lost some ground. Caitlin is in the middle of doing her evaluation of gas capture on a detailed basis. So I don't know company to company or even county to county where the problems are developing, but I do kind of know with regards to Fort Berthold Reservation and that. So when we get there, I want to comment, and I don't know how many of you watch the various states, but New Mexico is coming on like gangbusters, and they are seeing triple-digit thousands of barrels a day production increases. So the EIA is reporting that they have displaced us as second place in the nation. Oil and Gas Journal still has us second, with New Mexico a very close third. So at best, we're in a foot race for second place with New Mexico. At worst, they've actually replaced us as second place in the nation, and we would now be third. So that's an interesting bit of news in terms of where North Dakota and the Bakken sits. Of course, New Mexico is part of the Permian, the Delaware Basin. Fantastic productivity, a lot of rigs running, and of course they don't have winter there, at least not like we do. So that gave them a head start as we came out of the COVID pandemic and as we start to move into 2021. So we'll be watching that all summer long to see where North Dakota production goes and where New Mexico production goes. But more than likely, it's a toss-up and nose-to-nose horse race right now for April, May, and June. So that's an interesting piece of information for you. When we look at oil prices, they have improved dramatically March through today. And so looking at April, which is really kind of our focus, oil prices exceeded revenue forecast by 14%. Today's oil price is exceeding the revenue forecast by 34%. So budget-wise, we're ending the biennium, really, really well. We had a rough spot during kind of the middle of the biennium, but revenue forecast-wise, we're exceeding production and exceeding prices by significant margins. And even gas capture-wise in April, we were at 93%, and the target is 91%. So we're exceeding that, but we did lose 1% from March to April. Not much to say about rig count or inactive wells. Well, I should comment on that. Wells waiting on completion. So our drilling rigs are out running our completion crews. And so we saw wells waiting on completion go up by more than 100, from 628 to 731. So we're actually building a significant duck well inventory. We expected in April we'd start drawing that inventory down, but in fact it actually built as the rig count went to 20 and the frac crew count went from 9 down to 8. We're actually seeing an increase there, and so I need to have some conversations with some operators because I don't know any more detail behind that than that, other than our rig count, you know, from in April it was 15 and today it's 20. Our frac crews in April were 9 and today is 8. So that's going in the opposite direction, and that we're building a duck well count as opposed to drawing that down. I'm hoping that we'll see that change as we see, you know, May, June, July production come in, and we start to look at post road restrictions, because we still had road restrictions on in April. So that would have limited the frac crew count, but it's a little concerning that field inspectors today are reporting only 8 frac crews out there. So that's going to limit our ability to grow production and our completion potential. So we're right on the revenue forecast in terms of completions, and we've seen a significant drop, almost 300 wells less in the inactive column. So those are positives. Workover rigs are very, very busy. I think I had some conversations week before last with a couple of workover rig companies, one in particular that I recall, where they asked if we knew where they could find 60 rig hands. So they have more work than they can get to in terms of returning wells to production and maintenance and that sort of thing. And when you flip the page and you look at well count, we set a new record in terms of active wells. So at 16,374, that beats the old record by about 100. And so we're setting new records in terms of active wells producing, and that's encouraging. Also, with the higher oil prices, we're seeing the Energy Information Agency now project actual, reaching the demand levels of 2019 or pre-pandemic demand levels 6 months earlier by first or second quarter of next year, as opposed to the second half of next year. We saw good news on the DAPL civil action in terms of the pipeline and differentials, and so it now appears that DAPL is going to continue to operate at normal levels through March of next year. And then finally, talking about gas capture, statewide we lost 1%. In the Bakken, it remains steady at 94%. Non-Fort Berthold Bakken lost 1%. Fort Berthold Bakken lost 3%, and it was actually the Fee area, that area up east of Newtown, that lost ground the worst, down 7%. And so, like I said, that's as much as I know. It's the Fee area of Fort Berthold where we ran into some headwinds on gas capture, and I'll have to visit with Caitlin a little more to get a little more granular on that as to, is it some plant downtime? Is it, just exactly what is the story behind losing ground on the gas capture there on the Fee area of Fort Berthold? Nothing really new to report in terms of federal activity or congressional activity. So with that, we'll take some questions.
Anything in the room?
Just with regard to what you said about New Mexico, are you referring to the Today in Energy little thing that EIA put out today?
I am. Yes, thank you, Amy.
And so this has to do with March. So it looks like they were ahead of us in March, and then for April, I guess I don't know what New Mexico's number is. I don't know if you do yet either.
Right, we really don't, and so yeah, we're looking at that. The Energy Information Agency data on March does show them ahead of us, but I've got to dig a little bit deeper because that may include natural gas liquids, and they produce 6 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas as opposed to our a little bit less than 3 billion. So Is it crude oil and natural gas liquids? Is it crude oil alone? All I can tell you is March, April, May, we're neck and neck, head to head, and at the rate that they're growing production, they're going to pass us unless our pace picks up. So with only 8 frac crews running, we're not going to keep up. So unless we see an acceleration in our frac crew numbers to match our rig count acceleration, we're going to drop into 3rd place.
And do you know do you recall when North Dakota hit 2nd place and what state we beat to get to 2nd place?
I don't remember that. It's a very long time ago. We'll look into that for you, but do you remember what state it was? I'm sorry, was it last year that we passed Louisiana, or?
I thought it was Alaska.
Alaska? Yeah.
And then,
We'll look into that, Amy. I don't know the answer to that, but of course it's a fun competition.
yeah, well, I was going to ask on that note, the fact that North Dakota's had been in 2nd place, or maybe still is in 2nd place, is that more just like bragging rights, you know, that we have, or does that actually like mean anything to the oil industry?
Well, it does have some meaning, although it's hard to exactly quantify. The first thing where it matters is when companies, some of our private venture capital companies, go out to raise capital in terms of the interest of venture capitalists in investing. And so it matters when they have their meetings, particularly on the East and West Coast, to talk about, you know, where they're focusing their drilling activity and why they're putting it there. So we saw at one point, oh, yeah, Katie has the answer. Good. So we'll answer that in a minute. But at one point, we saw venture capital just only wanting people to get into the Permian. And of course, that was Texas and New Mexico. That's been less of a factor lately, but this could bring that back. And of course, as you probably noticed the news, Oasis just sold its Permian assets and became a pure Bakken player again. And so it does matter there. The second place where it matters is when North Dakota wants to flex its muscle a little bit on federal rules or with federal agencies in terms of, you know, being able to step out there and talk about why it's really important for them to listen to our opinion on a federal rule concerning, say, methane or leasing or factors like that. So it does make a difference. It's more than just bragging rights. It means something to the venture capitalists and also to the federal agencies. Katie looked it up. It was Alaska that we surpassed in 2012. So we've been #2 for 9 years, and this makes it kind of interesting and exciting.
So. If I can follow up off of that. When you say when North Dakota wants to flex its muscles, it's kind of more difficult when you have other states climbing the ranks. Are states like New Mexico, are their interests in working with feds different from the interests from North Dakota?
Yeah, so Jacob asked about, you know, differences, and absolutely, without question. Of course, Texas is in first place. Texas really often does its own thing. It has very little federal land, and so it's impacted in a very different way by federal rules. So it's affected the same as we are in terms of EPA rules, like on methane emissions or waters of the US or things like that. But in terms of federal leasing, it has almost no BLM lands and no Forest Service lands. New Mexico, on the other hand, is a majority federal BLM lands. And so their interests are vastly different. You know, we have about 1/3 of our spacing units are impacted by this BLM leasing decision. New Mexico is going to be more like 2/3, maybe 75%. So the interests differ quite a bit. And so it does make a big difference when who is in what place. Now, if you're in the top three, it probably kind of is all about the same, but very significant differences between North Dakota and New Mexico in terms of federal agency impacts.
I have a question that came in online from Dennis Blank. He was just wondering, related to that, is there any headway happening in regards to drilling on federal lands or any new information related to interactions with BLM?
So we have not seen any change in the attitude of the Department of Interior with regards to the federal leasing moratorium or the listening session or the attitude about wanting to look at the entire federal minerals program before reopening the federal leasing. I can tell you that North Dakota is getting closer to entering into litigation over that matter. And so you probably want to watch for an announcement in the not too distant future about that. So no, the federal government, the Department of Interior hasn't moved at all, but North Dakota is seeing growing impacts, especially if we get to the end of June. Well, we've already missed the June lease sale because they have to provide notice of those at least 45 days in advance. So we've already missed the June lease sale, and we're on the, I guess, on the threshold of missing the September lease sale. So we are inching towards upping the ante, I guess you would say.
There's a follow-up to that came in as well. Do you know by chance what that impact might be on New Mexico, considering just the comparison and how close we are in production, if they're equally as impacted in regards to that moratorium as North Dakota?
So the analysis that was done by the University of Wyoming shows that their impacts are 2 to 3 times ours in terms of federal lease bonuses, federal lease royalties, and the state share of those royalties. But what that analysis didn't bring in was the checkerboard effect, where in a decision in North Dakota not to lease often impacts the same amount or sometimes 2 or 3 times as much private and state mineral development as federal mineral development. So when you look at it on its face, New Mexico would appear to have a 2 to 3-fold impact to what North Dakota has. But the analysis that we're doing in the preparation of what I talked about shows that we're in fact impacted probably just as much as in New Mexico, but in a very different way. And that's really been what has kept us from joining in any of the existing litigation, is that our impacts are so different. Like I said, about 1/3 of our spacing units are impacted, but our impacts are based on enormous amounts of private and state mineral interests being impacted by federal decisions.
I'm going to change the subject just for a second because it was so interesting to me. Under seismic, you said seismic activity has stopped. Is that very important?
Dave asked about the comment the seismic activity has stopped, and I think it's very significant from the standpoint that there's no seismic activity going on right now when we look at our carbon storage prospects. There is no seismic activity going on right now in terms of Bakken and Three Forks, trying to work on some of the fringe areas in terms of better defining wellbore paths and those sort of things. So that would be an indicator that companies, if they're looking at future development, they're looking at spacing units that already have a well in them. They're not looking at spacing units that don't have a well. Now I can say that there is some renewed leasing activity out on some of the fringes. I've particularly heard in the southwest area over around Dickinson and south of there, as companies have started to look at the ability to improve economics with 3-mile and 4-mile laterals and some of the new hydraulic fracturing techniques and technologies, that there is some beginning to be some leasing activity on non-producing areas. So that may lead to some seismic activity, but it does tell you that everybody's playing this really close to the vest right now. And whatever development drilling they have planned for the rest of this year and for next year, and whatever completion activity is planned, is on spacing units that are already producing. So that is a significant statement. Good catch.
I got one more question for you, changing the subject again. We talked a little bit about this in the past, but maybe you can just update us on what sort of impact the drought is having in the oil fields.
Yeah, so the question was the impact of the drought in the oil field. We had a lot of requests to see if we would be willing to let companies vent their natural gas instead of flaring it. And that was a hard no. You know, just you just need to police your flare properly. But no, we're not going to give relief to allow people to just vent their methane or their natural gas and not, you know, safely flare it. So that
How would that have helped with the drought?
well, we were seeing, you know, with the fire danger and the high winds, we were seeing possible, you know, prairie fires, the potential for a prairie fire to be ignited by a flare. And so, you know, one of the first thoughts of companies was, well, maybe we could just turn the flare off on the red flag days. And we said, if you do that, you have to turn the well off. We're just not going to go there. So that was the first thing. Now, the second thing is fresh water supplies and for hydraulic fracturing. And so there's always the potential for that to get quite challenged. And we were happy to see some heavy rainfall that refilled, you know, some of the surface impoundments and that sort of thing. But that's going to be an ongoing challenge. So we do have a company that is working with us to test a produced water transfer system. And so we're working with them on that innovation. And we want to obviously minimize the amount of regulation we put on that, but we have to make sure that we're not going to have a spill and end up with produced water out on a pasture or field causing a bunch of damage. But there is a new technology being developed to transfer produced water to hydraulic fracture jobs, and potentially, at least initially, the first phase, they want to replace 25% of the fresh water. And by this time next year, they're hoping they're at 50%, and ultimately the following year at 75%. So some of the larger companies that are very still active doing hydraulic fracturing, they're looking to shift and be able to replace 50-75% of what they currently use in terms of fresh water with produced water. So that and that is absolutely a result of, you know, the drought and the challenge of getting fresh water for hydraulic fracturing. So
I have a question that came in online. You mentioned that trends in natural gas production could indicate some challenges down the road to the state's gas capture goals. What are we keeping an eye on that front? How much does production have to go up to start posing challenges on that flaring side?
I think Mr. Kringstad has some great slides on that. So I'll sort of defer that to him. But we have, you know, sort of coming out of the pandemic, we anticipated clear sailing through 2025. And I don't think that's our expectation anymore. I think we're expecting that we'll be fine through this year and next year, but we are really going to need to see some investment in gathering and processing probably by 2023, in order to keep us from falling below our gas capture goals. So we've shifted from, wow, things look great for 3 to 4 years to things look good for maybe a year and a half, and then we'd better see some significant capital investment. Fortunately, natural gas prices have improved, and natural gas liquids prices have improved. So, it's not so economically challenged anymore, but in terms of rising gas oil ratios and rising gas production, we maybe have half as much breathing room as we thought we had as recently as 4 months ago.
Any more questions for Lynn?
I'm good.
All right.
Thanks.
Able to pull that table up.
I couldn't get it on my, let me do it this way.
Gonna challenge the New Mexico number here.
That's right.
I'm gonna challenge the New Mexico number.
All right.
So for those of you online, we're just pulling up. While Lynn was speaking, I was on my phone quickly going through the official New Mexico state numbers for the month of March, and they are different than what the EIA was estimating in their report this morning. So.
Ooh, here we go.
And I didn't have time before 10 minutes ago to look that up, but I did see that report this morning, did read through it quickly. But so Katie was just going to try and pull that up real quickly.
This would be the New Mexico state numbers, what
their
they are.
mineral departments is reporting.
You know how I get to it from here?
Statistics.
Right. The drama.
The drama. Yeah, he just wants to keep us on the edge of our seats, doesn't he?
You're gonna make it here. Oh, you're gonna make it after the 6 o'clock, aren't you, Justin?
People still sitting outside and like, we're number 2. I know that feeling.
You want me to go all the way down?
Class at St. Mary's.
Hold this up. Show that we're gonna look at the total oil.
Okay.
And they say, so we'll join in this.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Krinkstead, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. I'm going to sidetrack here a bit just because of some of the previous discussion on Lynn's side. So hopefully up on your screens, you can see now. If you look at this is real busy. The far right-hand column has their total oil production. This is from the New Mexico Conservation Division. And if Katie scrolls all the way to the bottom for their most recent month, scroll down, and then so March is the most complete last month that they have, and they're, I believe it's 32,591,000 barrels of total production for the month of March, which totals 1.051 million barrels per day. So not the 1.16. So that still does keep North Dakota as the #2 oil producing state. So certainly not to take anything away from New Mexico and the industry developments down there. They have been growing very, very quickly, but at least from headlines and a statistics standpoint, North Dakota, at least as far as I'm concerned, is still that #2 oil producer in the nation. So, and North Dakota, we are anticipating that production is going to continue to rise here as we move into the summer months. So with that, we'll get that out of the way. We can answer any questions at the end if there are any, but we'll get right into my normal material. Less exciting and controversial for right now.
It's a horse race.
Which one's
There we go. So yeah, so looking at, again, there's been some questions I've been getting here as of late of what's happening in our neighboring states. Again, 0 drilling rigs in both of those two states at this time. Again, when we look at long-term potential, eastern Montana has the most potential in the future for development, but this time those two areas are remaining stagnant. On slide 3, Lynn had spoken a bit about the month-over-month changes. Again, this is just graphically to put into context where we were seeing those month-to-month changes on the growth side compared to what we've seen in the past. So relatively modest, both for oil and natural gas production growth month over month. On the oil transportation dynamics, the only real shift we saw some additional barrels moving towards rail in the month of April versus the pipeline network. On slide 5, you can see again that history, very, very minor, 1 to 2% changes. So any growth that we were seeing in the oil side from the statewide production side was moving on to the rail network and not getting onto the pipeline network. When we look at slide 6 for the estimated how much total physical barrels are moving out of North Dakota by rail car, it's right around that 215,000 barrels per day estimated for the month of April. So again, very consistent, some ebbs and flows over the last number of months, but the industry as a whole has stayed relatively consistent in total volumes. And then on slide 7, again, the destinations continuing to be the Pacific Northwest, being the prominent destination for North Dakota's crude by rail activity. Slide 8, when we look at what was taking place in March, the latest we have for pricing around the U.S., consistent story again this month. Pad 1 followed up by Pad 5 for the 2 highest price markets, and then followed up by Pad 3 down at the Gulf Coast. We move to slide 9. That's shifted here a little bit. So we're seeing Brent pricing less than $2 spread between Brent and WTI, and so that is quite narrow from what we've been seeing over the last number of months. And that LLS, that light sweet crude down in the Gulf Coast, at a $2.14 premium to WTI. And so for a while we had been seeing that the Brent have a premium to that LLS, but now we've seen that flip-flop a bit. So why does that matter to North Dakota? With the Dakota Access System and that direct connection from North Dakota to the Gulf Coast. The stronger that Gulf Coast pricing, the stronger the netback on Dakota Access will be, and that benefits the royalty owners in North Dakota, the producers, the state of North Dakota from a tax incentive perspective. So we do watch that Gulf Coast pricing very closely because it does influence what folks will do in their decisions out of North Dakota. And then on the imports, exports, not anything real out of the ordinary here. Again, very consistent with the trends of barrels moving north and south across the border, so I won't dwell on that. Then switching to the natural gas side of the world, as you heard Lynn say, we did bump up 1% in flaring statewide. Where that flaring percentage grew was in that orange piece of the pie, which is flaring from wells that are connected to pipeline systems. And so Lynn was asked a question about some of those upcoming challenges, and we're going to continue to be challenged with that segment of the industry is making sure that the systems that are connected, or all the wells that are connected to the gas gathering systems, have adequate capacity, not only from the wellhead, but all the way to the gas processing plant. And so as our gas oil ratios in the field, at the pad level, the individual well level, that continues to compound as you get closer and closer to the gas processing facility. And so any growth, unexpected growth in gas oil ratios at any point along that gathering system will slowly start to overwhelm the system, and we'll see pressures build up and flares go back to the wellhead. So it's going to be a continual challenge to stay on top of the gathering systems, making sure the compression is adequate, making sure that pigging operations to clear liquids is timed appropriately. And then that's just the first phase of that gathering and gas capture solution. The second would be on we'll go to slide 15 here, just to stay in the topic. That's the gas processing. So gas processing as a whole from the statewide, we are in a bit better position now, as Lynn said, for the next couple of years, but we're going to need some additional plants that have been planned to come online. The One Oak suspended facility have that come online. But even with these, here in the next, I would say the next several weeks, you'll likely see some new gas production forecasts from myself. I'm going to change up some ways I've been looking at this to be more consistent with some of the newer information that's coming out about gas oil ratios. And we'll likely see these curves grow at a stronger rate. And so, as Lynn alluded to, we're pressing up against some of these gas issues quicker than we had originally thought we were going to here just 4 to 6 months ago. I'm going to quickly back up Katie to slide 13. For a number of months now, we've been watching the number of new wells producing gas versus selling gas, and we saw a discrepancy between those where we had more wells coming online than wells getting connected. So there was a bit of concern. On a positive note here in the month of April, we did see a major jump in the number of new wells that were getting connected and brought online in the month of April to those gas gathering systems. So again, getting it connected, but then making sure that that connection has the capacity it needs all the way to the plant is the next phase that I just discussed. Slide 14, this is just an update of what the EIA was projecting for oil price outlook here in the US for WTI pricing. As you can see, they are anticipating some weakening as we move in towards the summer before really no strengthening for the next several years. That we're going to get into a bit of a flat area. But still, when you look at those price levels, the upper to mid 50s, that's certainly healthy enough for North Dakota to keep some good activity levels that we're anticipating here in the future. And last but not least, we'll just quickly talk about the Northern Border Pipeline. We're seeing some shifting on there, slide 18, 80, sorry. We have seen that market share shift, and what's taking place here, not shifted as in flip-flop, but we were seeing here in recent weeks more and more Canadian gas relative to Bakken gas. And it's not that North Dakota is producing less gas, as you can see in the numbers. What's taking place is what folks are doing with their gas and their natural gas liquids. And so on slide 19, we've been now for a number of weeks been watching the BTU levels on Northern Border decreasing. And so we've been talking for a number of years now about the increasing, but with particularly ethane prices where they're at right now, we have seen some midstream operators pulling ethane out and shipping it as an ethane, as an NGL product, and receiving a better netback for that NGL product than they would in the natural gas stream. And so what that does to Northern Border is it pulls ethane out of border that, or gas that would have otherwise gone into Northern Border, and it's offsetting. So, but in the event that ethane market shifts, we'll likely see that BTU numbers start to prop up again, those market share numbers prop up again. And again, it's all a market dynamic versus a physical production concern at this time. And then the last thing here, many of you on this call, if not all of you, have saw the press release and the news about FERC approving the North Bakken expansion project. And so I won't dig too much into the details behind it. I know that for North Dakota, some numbers that I'd put together on slide, apologies, it doesn't have a slide number, for what it would mean. So there's a question about why is this particular pipeline important to North Dakota? And what it does is that north of Lake Sakakawea, that area is currently constrained in its ability to receive additional residue gas. And what that means is that's the choke point in their gas capture scenario. So without incremental pipeline capacity north of Lake Sakakawea, it was really challenging for new projects to be developed. You could not just stick a new gas plant north of Lake Sakakawea because you had no place for the tailgate of that gas plant to move its gas. And so this system, once online, would free up that area north of Lake Sakakawea for additional gas capture investment, more residue gas takeaway, in turn then allowing producers to get more active north of Lake Sakakawea. And so I'd try to do some rough numbers of what it would mean to the state from a tax revenue. It was over $1 million a day, with just some rough numbers at its nameplate capacity. So that's a significant impact for the industry, the state, and all the folks north of Lake Sakakawea that have had challenges now for a number of years because of the lack of adequate residue gas pipeline capacity. So The construction is expected to start here in the next several weeks with a targeted in-service of late this year. So with that, I believe that's the last slide I have, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Go ahead.
Well, do you know offhand, you mentioned One Oak, that project. Are there other projects that are in the pipeline now, at least through the planning stages?
There are folks, yeah, certainly looking at either expanding existing gas processing facilities or new greenfield projects. And so it's typically easier because of the current pipeline networks to add another train or another unit right at one of the existing complexes. But there are areas, particularly north of Lake Skakawea, that they lack large gas processing complexes. And so there's some opportunities certainly north of the lake for that.
Do you have a feel for what accounts for this discrepancy between the EIA and New Mexico's numbers? I mean, do we think it's like they were including natural gas liquids within EIAs?
I don't. If you look at even the EIA, so the question was why the discrepancy. If you go to the EIA's state level oil production for North Dakota in March, they have us at, I believe, like 1.02 million. It's not consistent with DMR's official numbers. So I think there's some estimating that goes on. They receive reports and estimate a bit differently, whereas the statewide numbers should be the gold standard as far as getting every individual well's production. So I would certainly rely on the state regulators versus some of the estimating techniques that might get used there.
Okay. Do you know, does North Dakota report its data to EIA, or do they just get their data from someone else?
We do, yeah, we send it to them every month. Gas production, oil production, gas flared, even the amount of inert gas that's produced and vented, so.
Yeah, and so I don't know why, and I pulled it up sitting over there, why their March number for North Dakota is not really even close to what it was. So I'm not sure where they're pulling those.
Is this kind of a one-time data discovery, or is there a regular inconsistency with EIA data with what you guys send them?
I've never compared the two to see. I mean, I know it's never a perfect one-to-one match. It's usually fairly consistent, but yeah.
Do you know where North Dakota stacks up among other states in terms of gas production? Like, are we number 4 or 5? Do you know?
I did check this not too long ago, and off the top of my head, it's not in the top 5. I want to say we're in the, again, I can get this number for you, but it's somewhere in that probably 7 to 9 range. So.
One of the big elephants, of course, in the room concerning everything is the denial of Keystone XL. At one point, there was supposed to be potentially an on-ramp, I think in Baker.
Correct.
Am I correct?
Yep.
That, from what I understand, was not going to materialize anyway, correct?
So the question was about the Baker on-ramp that's been proposed with the Keystone XL pipeline for a number of years now. And so a bit of history there. So there's 2 different companies that had proposed a facility at Baker. One was at the time Quintana, which was going to bring a line down through Dickinson or Freiburg and then all the way to Baker. And then True Companies was going to use their Baker hub as one of the other potential on-ramp facilities. And so over the years, as that project continued to get delayed, certainly North Dakota's production didn't slow down. And so those midstream companies had to find other solutions in a more timely manner. And so a lot of those commitments and barrels got reallocated to other systems and other expansions. So at the present time, there were no longer any companies physically looking at or having commitments to put barrels on at Baker, Montana. But that doesn't mean that in the future, if that system was ultimately constructed and put into service, that option was always there as we look for, future export needs.
And that would not involve blending Bakken oil with Canadian oil. That would just be like stopping the Canadian oil, letting Bakken oil flow, and then resuming the Canadian oil.
Correct. Yep. So the question was about pipeline batching, and so that was one of the original questions of could North Dakota's light sweet barrel, and what would that look like in the Keystone XL pipeline? And the Pipeline Authority, we did a study almost 10 years ago where we had some engineers look at that batching process, and so it was system that's used regularly with most crude oil pipelines, where they'll batch a light sweet barrel with a medium sour, and they'll have various batches of various sizes moving down, and they'll get diverted at tankage along the route, so it can keep its quality in spec.
Question online that came in, kind of similar in nature, how the Line 3 announcement also, what that might be for impacting North Dakota.
Yeah, so for North Dakota Oil will not be moving on Line 3. However, Line 3 does enter that Great Lakes refining region, travels through Clearbrook, Minnesota on its way to Superior. And so that system will certainly have regional impacts as it supplies crude oil to those Great Lakes refineries and further south. And so for North Dakota, what this means is, again, when we look at opportunities in the future for oil production growth, those opportunities continue to be getting down to the Cushing, Oklahoma hub, as well as the Gulf Coast, because again, those Great Lakes refineries are very well supplied with current North Dakota production as well as Canadian production. So for future major projects out of North Dakota, they're gonna have to continue to move further south.
I don't think I have any other questions. Anything else in the room?
Oh, just, well,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, just on Keystone XL, at least some of the reports we were hearing is that when the Biden administration said no, that's what propped up gas prices, oil prices, correct? Or at least that's what they were, that was the contention, is that you saw prices spike, you know.
I don't know if I have a good sense of the market timing of what was causing those ups and downs, if it was that or if it was other reports that were coming out with storage volumes and production from OPEC and other things. So yeah, I don't have a good comment right now without looking into it a little bit further. Yeah, sure.
Anything else? All right, thanks so much. We'll
Okay.
see you guys next month.
See.